So my name is Vanita Gupta. When people ask me what my craft is, I say that I'm a multidimensional health and wellness coach. I'm an energy healer. I'm also a chef, a vegan chef at an Ayurvedic spa, and I'm a homeschooling mom. I do lots of different things. But what I'm here to talk to you about is more of my background. So I have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology and an MBA in pharmaceutical marketing. I was born into a family of medicine. My parents are doctors. All my relatives are doctors, even the next generation, my brother and all my cousins. Everybody's in the medical field of some sort. And, this is something that has always been in my background. I also, grew up in a situation where I had a brother and sister who were born with neurodegenerative disease. It's a very, very rare disease. It only occurs in a small population of people that exist in India within the specific caste system. It's definitely a story of inbreeding right there. But it is, something that was part of my background, and I really watched the medical industry firsthand at home, not only from the outside with everything that was going on, with the way Pharma courted doctors and, everything that was happening in the hospital systems, but I watched it firsthand at home. And my brother passed away when he was 10 and I was 12, and my sister passed away when she was 8 and I was 15. So this was a really, serious part of my early childhood, and I was very deeply ingrained in medicine. I could spell the word phenobarbital before I could spell the word congratulations. So medicine was definitely just my everyday life, and I never really thought twice about it. At the same time, I never felt like it was right. My mom used to tell me about how much I would argue with her about the problems with the medical system, even when I was 7 years old. So this was something that obviously I knew, deep inside of me, that this was something that I was there to really resist and fight. As I grew up and didn't know what to do. I was very lost in my own stories of victimhood and trauma, and didn't know what to do with my life. I just did what was easy for me, and science was easy for me. And so I didn't go the route of everybody else. I didn't get an MD, I got a PhD, because that way I got paid instead of paying bills. And, I said that I would never work for Pharma. I said I would never do it. And then I've learned to never say never. Because, what happened to me when I was in the research end was that research is very laborious, and it is also, it doesn't make any sense. You are constantly doing these experiments that are yielding, conflicting results nonstop, and you're trying to make sense of it. And there's a lot that I understand now that I couldn't understand then, because I was totally asleep and not really aware of what was happening. But the idea that research is something that is reproducible, or that it is something that we really understand what we're seeing in terms of results, is just a false myth. And so I got very frustrated with research. Research also was fun for me at some point, and it really got to be you're not allowed to take risks in science, because everything is based on funding and grants, and really everything was about publish or perish, and I just lost that passion for it. So I figured if I was going to do any of this, then I might as well be making money, and the money in pharma is like heroin. It is addictive, it is a lot, they throw it at you, and they keep you ingrained in it. And because I have a very unique perspective on this, because I was on the research end working with DNA, RNA, and protein, everything that you know about now. But I also then moved into the corporate, and I moved into scientific communication. So this was in the area of really corporate and product narratives for almost everything that you hear. I was leading scientific strategy for all of the top tier pharma companies, a lot of companies today, and also biotech. So I have a really in-depth knowledge of this stuff. This is something that, I was working with the C-suite, I was working with marketing, I was working with patient advocates, I was working with the doctors. I have a really kind of, wide view of this. And so I wanted to open this up as a Q&A, because, I know a lot of people have always asked me questions about, what the industry is like and, what's really going on. However, as I was thinking last night, there was just a lot of thoughts that were coming to me. My guides were telling me, you should talk about this and you should talk about that. And I started writing a lot of notes. I'm going to talk a little bit first and then open it up to this Q&A. So I think everybody here, we're all on the same page. Usually I'm trying to convince people about like what's wrong with pharma to try to wake them up. I don't need to do that here. We're all on the same page when it comes to that. So I'm going to actually go onto the other side, and we're going to talk about why disparaging pharma is not necessarily the best thing for us, why we need to be better than that, and why we need to empower ourselves with the words that we use and the choices that we make. So, let's just start with some of the basic foundations of what's wrong with the whole medical industry and science in terms of medical science, and pharma in general. So I just want to bring up 4 principles that I think really lay the foundation of why there is so much wrong with this. So first, right, the basic foundation of belief within everything within the medical industry is based on a previous belief system that has been told to us, but we don't necessarily investigate into it. So whether you're talking about germ theory or you're talking about how the body functions and works, when you come into the study of science, you're operating on a pre-existing belief system. And there's no time to go and research all of the pre-existing beliefs and dismantle that. I know that because my entire dissertation was about really dismantling a belief system that existed about something very small, a very small protein, and it has to do with our eye health. And that took years of research and a lot of money. Now imagine doing that for every aspect of our healthcare system. It's just not something that's done. So what ends up happening is people come in, they take the pre-existing belief system, and then they build upon it. And so this is where we start off with something as simple as germ theory, and now we are in the situation that we're in right now. So it's the basic foundation is incorrect. And this doesn't just occur in science. I mean, we do this with everything, right? Like we're, as soon as we grow up and get a job, you just start paying income taxes without even thinking about it. You don't think twice about most of our life that this is just what we do. So this is not the fault of science alone. I mean, I'm, homeschooling my daughter, and I start questioning everything that I'm, quote unquote supposed to teach her, which I don't teach her. But things like history, we are under this idea that the history that we're taught is actually what happened, but we know that history is only told by the victors, and that even that is a skewed story. We really don't know what happened in the past, we just have ideas. So, it's not just in science, this is throughout life, but the idea that that basic foundation is wrong is, one of the core issues that occurs. The next thing is that, especially, pharma, but all of medical science is focused on our tangible physical being. Now, we are not physical beings. We are energetic beings housed in physical bodies. We are less than 0.01% physical beings. Like, we are just not. This is all an illusion, right? If we want to talk about it as a hologram, as a simulacrum, whatever you want to talk about, quantum physics, you can look at it in so many different ways. We are just not physical beings. And so when you are looking at something like pharma and you're looking at medical science, what are they doing? They're only treating our physicality. I mean, medical science barely, if at all, considers the mind as part of the body. Then, and treating our emotional and mental health as part of our overall health. How are they going to even get into our greater beingness? So most of our beingness, the 99.9% of us, is ignored. And so if that's not even addressed, we're never going to get to the crux of what's really going on and how to better take care of ourselves. The third problem is that medicine is the study of pathology, of dead things, not physiology, how things live and how things move. When we are looking at everything that we study in medical science, it is looking at it based on Newtonian physics, this idea of cause and effect. So when you have a dead tissue, or when you have an isolated cell system, like that's quote unquote a living cell system, but it's an isolated cell system in culture, you are studying a single thing. So you stimulate something, you give it a hormone, you give it a protein, you just give it a stimulus of some sort, and you look at the reactions. It leads to this triggering that, which then goes into the nucleus, stimulates the DNA responds in that way. This is very much a linear progression that doesn't occur in nature, that doesn't occur in reality. We are like multiple hundreds upon hundreds of chemical reactions that are occurring in a single cell based on a single stimulus. And then we have 37 trillion cells in our body. All of this is happening simultaneously. So when we're looking at this stuff in this idea of, a linear fashion, we're really not understanding the complexity of what's going on. So the study of pathology and the study of dead things is just not giving us an idea of what it means to live. And so this is a core error in understanding how the human body works. And then finally, there's in medical sciences, and I think you can, you see this when you go to the doctor, there is a separation in what it takes to prevent a disease and what it takes to cure a disease. When really, the way you prevent a disease is the way you cure a disease. They rely on the same foundations. And so when you separate the prevention from the cure, you're never going to get to the root of the problem. And then this is why we end up treating this it's even less than 0.01%, right? Where it's just a little minor fraction of that physicality, because you're looking at this isolated dead thing that works in a linear fashion, and you're not even looking at the whole system. And so when we are focused on this idea of the cure being separate from the way we live and the way we operate, then we're never going to get to the root of the problem. And then the other problem is that a lot of the science is focused on symptoms. Symptoms being a problem, when symptoms are actually the release. Symptoms are actually our body finally getting rid of whatever the problem was. Symptoms are the communication pathway that our body has with us to tell us that we are off balance in some way. So these are, I think, some of the, fundamental problems that exist with the way modern science is operating. Now, when we talk about things like, the prevention of disease and a cure of disease, I look at somebody like my brother and sister. These things wouldn't necessarily, prevent their, early deaths in any way. But that's also, a very different pathway. That, this is a larger understanding of things. And this is, when we start to really understand that, there are paths that come in and there are things that we can't explain and reasons why souls incarnate to experience certain things that we will just never fully understand. But I do know that, they may not have been cured with, let's say, better nutrition and, positive affirmations and whatever you want to, all of these different things that we can talk about. They may not have been cured about that, but they would have lived a very good life with that. So it's not going to hurt. It's only going to help when we start thinking about these things. So these are just some of the basic foundations that I want to say as being the problem. But a lot of the time when I hear people talking about pharma, including myself, and I have to always watch myself with this, I want to disparage it. I want to put it down. I want to talk about the problems. I want to talk about what they are doing to us. What is, what oppression they are causing in society and how they are hurting people. But really, truly, we all rely on it to some degree at some point. I am grateful for pharma for that time that I cut the tendon in my finger by carving a pumpkin. And I had to have emergency surgery. And I am so grateful that I did not have to have that without anesthesia. There are things that we rely on, and it's about how we choose to use it. It's about the fact that there is a purpose to that. Now, where we can empower ourselves and empower others is by choosing the language that we use to talk about these things. Rather than labeling something as all bad or them as the problem, how can we really empower others to think differently, including people who work in the industry? including those that are the ones administering this, that were like me, just being educated in a certain way and not realizing that, there's other ways of thinking about things. People just need to wake up, and we are seeing more and more doctors and nurses and healthcare providers waking up. And so when we are engaging with people, this is an opportunity for us to rise above. They're not going to change. They have no reason to change. We're complaining about them and they're complaining about us. And when they complain about us, you know what they do? They strategize on how to convince us that they're right. And so instead of us just sitting around and complaining, what we can do is think about how we can empower them to think differently. And that's how we are going to get them on our side. It's through this idea of, what they're thinking about is, just a no, that nothing else works except what we do. What we need to include and empower ourselves with is that concept of yes and. Yes, that's an option, and we can do this. Because that's really what it is. There is more to our physical health than what they are studying. And so when we have a yes and approach, then we start talking about things that they can't even begin to comprehend, like the Akash or energetic beings. We can bring in other things because it's not that Reiki is going to cure you alone. It's all of the combination of things that are going to help you live a better life overall. So this is where we get to empower ourselves. It's really important that, we advocate for ourselves, that we empower ourselves with knowledge, that we know these things, because you always have a choice. There's going to be a time where you may need to go to a doctor, like when I cut this tendon in my finger and, I need to go to the hospital. But that's where I get the choice to say what I want and what I don't want. It means reading those forms. It means not just signing off on things. It really means stepping into your power and really using your voice to do so. And, you can go down the rabbit hole of, how far you go. But isn't this really what we always talk about with sovereignty? Right? Sovereignty is about how much you are willing to do in your life. You can go out and drive without a driver's license and empower yourself with knowledge of what to do if you get stopped, or you can have the convenience of having a driver's license. This is what pharma is. It's convenience. It's all about convenience, and we live in a convenience culture. People would rather just pop a pill than figure out why they have a headache. People would rather just have a cup of coffee rather than thinking about the ways that they're living in order to need that cup of coffee every morning, leading to an addiction cycle. We live in a convenience culture. This is just what we have been, brought up to accept, and that has been what they are selling to us. And this is where we need to empower ourselves to recognize, where are we willing to forego conveniences? What are we willing to let go of? And when you are thinking about those things, you begin to realize why other people have made the choices that they make. We all know that people took that jab because they wanted the convenience of returning to quote unquote normal life. That's all they wanted. Some people believe that, it works and whatever, but for the most part, people just wanted to return to the life they had before. It was about convenience. This is what we do with our every choice. We're constantly making these choices based on what is convenient for us to do. Should I go stop and pick up dinner somewhere, or am I going to cook it myself? These are choices of convenience. And so we need to understand what we are going to change within ourselves in order to let go of convenience culture. And as we let go of convenience culture, we begin to understand the opportunities that exist before us that allow us to make better decisions that empower our health all around. Now, one of the things that I remember I would always hear, and I would have lots of different arguments for it when I was in pharma, is that pharma has the cure. and they are hiding it from us. How many times have you heard that or said that yourself? Pharma has the cure, and they're hiding it from us. Well, this is putting the power in pharma's hands, that they have something that we want that they're not giving us. But I'm going to tell you what the truth is. Pharma hasn't had the cure. We have always had the cure, and it's been hidden in plain sight. It's been hidden in front of us. And what is the cure? It's sunlight. It's organic food. It's clean water. It's clean air. It's removing stress. It's turning off the TV. It's all of the things that we've ever known. But because it's not convenient, we haven't been doing it. And now we've been empowering pharma with having something that we need. So truly, the power is in your hands. You have the power to be a healthy person. It all starts with you. So, that's what I wanted to say before I open it up. If anybody had any questions, if you want to know what happens in boardrooms with the C-suite. Yes. So I became neurotic in the lab. I was, I've always been, a spiritual person, and I was studying tarot and Ayurveda at the same time that I was, earning a PhD in molecular biology. So, but I would look at moon cycles and, do things in triplicate upon triplicate replicates that I was just, because I couldn't reproduce things from experiment to experiment. So I would run the experiment at the same time. Because the variability, I was like, oh my God, has the air pressure changed? What's changed? Because it's just driving you insane. So honestly, research, when you look at published results, and especially within medical sciences, I don't know what it is in other sciences. You can talk to Julian about, what things are like for him and his type of research. But, for me, within that kind of biomedical research, you are publishing based on maybe 5 to 10% of your work. The other 85 to 90% is just, 95% is really just noise. And so you're constantly looking for this signal, and you're looking for that greatest signal. Now, what's happening is when you get to something like a clinical trial, when you're getting out of early research, primary research, and you get into something like a clinical trial, this is why, the parameters are so strict. So, when we entered into 2020, I'd already quit my career, and I'd already, I'd been disillusioned for a very long time at this point. And I've always believed in food as medicine, and I've always, taken care of myself in other ways. But I still had, this idea that maybe there was some sort of sanity within clinical trials and within sanity within pharma. And I didn't 100% believe that everything that was going on was just, a falsehood that was created. I didn't believe that at that point. But the moment I saw the way that the phase 1 trial and then the phase 2 trial for the vaccines had been developed, I knew this entire thing was a sham. Because you can see the way they set these things up in order to get the result that they're looking for. Because there is so much noise in science, and the only way to do it is to really tighten the parameters so much that there is no variability. And so this is why you find, especially in clinical trials, patient populations are extremely similar. There's they lie to you. They put the demographics of patients up, and they say, look, we're about balanced, men and women, this and that. But there's no way to get a true real world population. And so what ends up happening is many drugs, once they're approved after a phase 3 trial, they go through what's called a phase 4, which is real world observations, when the drug is used out in the real world. And you will see that the data is so variable. And so what they end up doing is, in order to hide all that, they do these complex data analyses where they take multiple clinical trials, they put it together, and they kind of get an average. And so they're just hiding this data. They're just kind of teasing it together so that it looks okay. The reason I was really frustrated with research was because you could publish something and somebody would publish the opposite the next day. Because again, it just changes based on those parameters. So a lot of it is noise. And, what is actually real? I don't know. I started having these kind of questions, over these last couple of years where I'm like, we are looking at these results with machines that are developed by us to pick up a signal that we are dictating. So, what are we really looking at? Is that real proof? I don't know. Who's to say, like we there are people who say, well, there's no spirits, there's nothing here. These trees are not releasing pheromones because we can't see it, we can't measure it, we can't smell it. But that's because we don't have the instrumentation to detect that. And that usually comes about, 50 to 100 years later. And, by that point, we're only measuring and seeing what we want to see, what we think we're going to see, as opposed to what's really there. So, how much of actually what we see is true and, how much of it is noise? It's all going to be based on perception.
So you're saying the manipulation of the data for COVID was just more of what they already do with everything else?
Yes, it was more of it. So, yeah, so with typically what happens is, like Pharma likes to say that one of the things they like to brag about is the fact of their speed to develop a drug. We developed this and, we got this to approval in 2 years. And I'm like, is that really good that, Okay. So, you've been doing things faster. And so what happened with the COVID vaccine is that obviously, you obviously know that there's something fishy because somehow they have genetic sequences of something that they supposedly don't know and that is novel. And so that's a false flag right there, right? Like that's a flag that, something is false right there because there's no way that they have a genetic sequence for something they don't know when we can barely get the genetic sequences of things that we do know. So then on top of that, when it comes to the development of that clinical trial, they did what they call a phase 1/2, and that's when you're starting to look at like early data, just trying to figure out what the response will be. It's typically safety data. So you're just looking to see if there's any sort of big red flag that this is going to kill somebody. Now, instead of safety data, they were actually looking at efficacy data, which again is another flag for me, because they were trying to figure out what this thing actually does. They were hoping for a reduction in transmission, but they didn't find that. So I remember that, I used to say, I think somebody told me this and I repeated it, that, science is like taking spaghetti and throwing it at a wall, and wherever the spaghetti is, you draw the bullseye around that. So that's kind of what they did, right? They were hoping for a reduction in transmission. They didn't get that. So they were like, oh, it reduces symptoms. Yeah, but it reduces symptoms. And then the other thing that happened was I saw the design of the phase 1/2, and I was following that trial really closely, and they had the data pretty quickly. And I remember telling my brother, who's an oncologist at UCLA, and like some other people, like, this data looks fishy. And I was talking about this stuff, and they were like, oh, can you send it to me? And I went back, and that whole thing had been scrubbed. It had changed. It changed overnight. They scrubbed it, and they didn't say that they had. So that, again, it's more of what they did. It was just in real time, where if you were paying attention, you could witness it. Yeah. I think, it's one of those things where it was all the things that I saw, but now I could see it happening before my eyes, and there was just no question.
So I always thought that the thing you said earlier was like to stay away from saying that they have the answer, cure or whatever, and they're keeping it. I always just thought they weren't really interested in a cure for anything, because there's no money in curing things. So would that be a more accurate thing to say? Is like they aren't even looking for cures?
I don't know if they're not looking for cures because, number one, they'll never find a cure because the cure is not in the way that they are looking, right? Because as we discussed, it's only the physical nature of things. So disease is not caused, by the time disease actually hits the body, by the time we're looking at the physicality, there's something going on elsewhere. There's something happening within our total beingness that's, then gotten to the point of the density contracting into our physical being that is causing that disease. So they're never going to find a cure. Pharma is so intricately linked with everything else that they are causing disease just as fast as they would be curing it. They will always have a patient population. If you 99% of their drugs cause a type of cancer, right? Like you take a cancer drug, you're going to get another cancer. So there's always going to be a patient population. They're never going to have a pure cure. So whether they're looking for it or not, I think the only reason that they would want to look for it is to say that they have a cure. Right? It's to be able to say those words. And, the only way you could say you have a cure is that you have a cure, you cured breast cancer, but let's not talk about the fact that you ended up with, white blood cell cancer and, even, another cancer somewhere else and all these other problems. Yeah.
It's kind of a nerdy question, but does Big Pharma use the null hypothesis in their research, and what is the null hypothesis?
So you're saying what is the null hypothesis, like in terms of proving something to not be true? But in terms of do they use it, are you saying in their clinical trial design as they are as they're attempting to design the trials?
I was thinking more about your research that frustrated you because you kept getting different answers.
Yeah, so it's there, the problem with biology and most sciences is that biostatistics is not really well taught. So it's kind of like, they're using the wrong statistical models in order to show what they want to show. And so they use a very kind of, and everything is arbitrary. They're just, for example, like, you can look at clinical trial designs and they're going to say something works, or even research, they'll say something works and like the p-value is going to be different for every different paper. There used to be this idea of having something like a standard, but they're using a t-test and instead of, using whatever test they should be using. So the statistics are all wrong. Very few scientific papers are actually using the correct statistical models that they should be using. Now, when I say, even let's not even get into like statistics, I'm just talking about the basic like viewing of a protein. So for example, if I run an experiment and I'm looking at the expression of a protein and I isolate that protein from a cell and I run it on a gel and I'm just looking for that expression of that protein, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. I mean, it could be something even as difficult as that, because there are so many variables that go within running that experiment, but more than anything, there are so many variables that go into the way the cell is studied. And because, again, like I said, it's not looked at as a dynamic system, when you introduce, so what I was doing is, because I didn't believe in using cell culture, and I thought that was looking at a dead cell system. So I actually used human tissue, and I used to get from surgeries, people who donated their tissue for research science. And so I would actually be using live specimens in order to run my studies. And so when you look at that and you have like a general human population, it becomes impossible to study things. Techniques to connect to the spirit guide. So I think the number one thing is to remove the belief that you don't have a connection at all times with your spirit guides. So it's, I think a lot of people are asking, like, how do I connect with them? And I think it's the first thing of recognizing that they are always talking to you. And so it's about opening up and receiving and listening. And so how do you do that? You quiet. You become quiet. You quieten the mind. And you just allow yourself to be in a receptive mode, which I think is something that is really difficult for a lot of people. because we constantly have the chatter going on. So what happens is it comes in the sense of intuition. It comes in the form of, it can be an outside voice. It can be a knowing. It can be a vision. There's so many different ways. It can be a smell. It can be a memory. What ends up happening is it comes in very softly and very quickly. And what ends up happening is our ego mind overpowers that. It starts thinking about something else. It puts a story to what we just heard, saw, thought, smelled, whatever it is. It creates a story around that, and it dilutes that message. And it often, what ends up happening too, is that it questions if that was really a sign, if that was really a message. So I say that, it really is about trusting that initial gut instinct, that initial whatever it is that you received. And, rather than asking, was that an answer? Was that a message? Was that a sign? Just say, yes, it was. And allow that to lead you down a path. Because sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. It might be like, I don't know, what's, you have like a big problem. What should I do with my child? And, the thing that you hear is go take a walk. And you're like, what? What does that mean? And so you end up, thinking like, I'll take a walk later. I don't have time for a walk. I have to go do this thing and blah, blah, blah. And so then you forget and you don't understand the message.
So would you say a lot of the techniques, one of the main techniques that Big Pharma tries to use is basically obfuscation or confusion through increasing levels of complexity in the data?
Yeah, I think two different ways. So as you said, increasing levels of complexity is definitely there, and, this idea of really drilling down that this is truly scientific and it's the forefront of science. And, like take for example, like RNA therapy, right? Like using RNA, like this is the forefront of science. And this is something, RNA has been researched and studied and evaluated for like 25 years, right? It was the type of science that nobody wanted to do because it was so difficult to do. And it was always been there, and it's always had its difficulties, and it's, it hasn't worked in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons. And there are companies that use RNA therapy that's different from what we know. But they just promote this as being, something that is really understood and really well researched, and then like people are trying to understand what RNA is. And so there is like a complexity that comes with it, but then there's also a simplicity that they put into it so that people can understand enough to think that they know everything, so that, they think they can formulate an argument as to like why this is good. So there's both a complexity and then simplifying that complexity. But I feel like the biggest thing with pharma is that constant controlled opposition that you don't really realize that's happening in front of your eyes, right? So, you want to talk about diet and nutrition, right? The reason why you see so many arguments out there is like, is vegan good? Is paleo good? Is this good? Is that good? This is all being done by the very same companies. They're putting all of that information out there because the idea is just confuse you on all levels. It's the inability to make a decision that is your own and then relying on an external authority to make that decision for you. So that way, when you rely on an external authority to make a decision for you, they can manipulate what that external authority is saying. So whether it's the media, whether it's the doctor, whether it's, whoever, they are just parroting out whatever they're being sold, whatever they're, being courted to, whatever new papers come out, whatever the reps are saying, whatever they have paid government, like the FDA or, the World Health Organization to say. So all of it is about really relying on just something outside of you telling you what's right for you. Yeah.
I have a yes and
Yes.
because I don't think it's just pharma, right? I mean, it's like we live in a technocratic society in which people maintain their power by making things artificially too complex for the average person to understand. I mean, it's one of us doing any nutrition that kind of feel the science, but then I don't understand like the tax code. You know, and the tax code is so complicated that you need to go see an accountant to figure it out. And so there's a lot of things that we're thinking about when we're making this. So pharma is just one little side.
All right.
I was gonna say, isn't there like something where like they could do hundreds of studies, but all you need is like 2 or 3 to like submit to the FDA. So the rest of the studies could say like that this thing is nonsense. Like, isn't it placebos perform better than Prozac, for example? But all they need is like some of these outlier studies where they get the result they want. They can submit that and get things approved, right?
Yeah, it's you really and not even that has variability within it too. So 2 to 3 studies to get something approved. When you have 2 to 3 phase, like you need 1 phase 3 trial and then like 2, phase 1, phase 2 trials. If you use accelerated pathways for approval, so they have things like breakthrough designation and accelerated approval, and there's all these pathways which shorten the timeline that you need to get to approval, and for some of those you only need 1 or 2 studies. So then there's accelerated approvals that lead to like conditional approvals, so where something is approved until it meets the criteria of a phase 3 trial and then it gets full approval. All of this stuff is garbage nonsense. All it means is that this is all about the amount of money they spend on marketing. So it's if they have a conditional approval, they can only speak to certain things when in marketing, and when they have a full approval, they can sell it to everybody. So it's all just BS stuff to begin with. And yes, you need very little data to do it. And the problem is that every single time there is a new medicine that goes through a faster pathway, the reason why the vaccine is like what I like to call it, the quacksine. The reason why it was really dangerous in terms of the pathway to approval is that it lowers the bar. And as soon as it lowers the bar, it sets precedents for other medicines to follow that pathway. That's the most dangerous thing about it. I think I see somebody. Yes.
Are the commercials actually effective? Because for me, I watched them, which is so ridiculous, right? These actors. How did the U.S. do you know anything about how U.S. was able to have such commercials? Because I heard they're one of the only countries besides New Zealand. And then, is it actually worth the money? Like, do people actually, like, I don't know. Do you guys ever laugh? Like, when you were like, oh my goodness, this is a ridiculous.
Do you know what's funnier? Is filming them. I have been behind the scenes of those getting filmed, and I've had to edit the safety precautions as they, so I've seen it all. The ROI is actually pretty good. It's really good, which is why they invest in them. So most people who watch TV are watching unconsciously. All they need is for that to be in the back of my head. Do I have restless leg syndrome? Well, should I talk to my doctor about that? That's all they need, because that's all it takes for them to ask the doctor. The doctor then asks for a rep. That's, yeah. They don't care. It's like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Is that what's wrong with me? Because they're watching unconsciously, because they're sitting down, they're not moving, they're eating bad food, they're doing all the things that, oh, that's my cure. My cure is out there. Maybe that's what's wrong with me. So unfortunately, and what, I mean, you've seen, I'm sure, how everything traces back to Vanguard and BlackRock, and they're all owned by the same thing. So why are these commercials allowed in the U.S.? Because they control the media, and then, this is all paid and funded by Pharma. I'm sure you've heard those statistics, like, some of the research that was done that the people who were behind censoring, like Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, the fact checkers were actually funded by Pfizer. So, I mean, there's so many conflicts of interest that are involved in this, that when you look at it, it's really one entire system. Which is why, again, when I was talking about it, it's like, how far are you willing to go? What are you willing to give up? What are you willing to do to actually really extricate yourself from this whole thing?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the angels, right? The angel comes into the room when you have been in surgery and you open your eyes and there's glowing bright white lights staring down at you with somebody in this white coat. You've got an angel there. Yeah. All right. I think we're good then. All right. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Oh, yeah. One more. Oh, sorry. Say that again. Oh, what is in the jab? Personally, what I think. So, why would they use RNA? I think they're trying to silence something. So usually when you're looking at short nucleotides of RNA, it's silencing molecules. And the only studies that have really worked in humans with RNA therapy are to silence gene expression. So what are they trying to silence is my big question. So there's a numerous things, and usually when you're looking at short nucleotides of RNA, they are non-specific. So it could be silencing lots of different things. And again, I think it's more of a suppression tactic than anything else. And then, what are the other additives in there? That's always the question. So, we've heard about lots of different things from graphene oxide to, all the different ways, nanobots, whatever you want to talk about. Who knows what's actually in that? But I think the point of the RNA is more of a silencing molecule.
Depends on the lot, too.
It depends on a lot. There's a lot, yeah. We can go in a lot of different ways.
I meant the lot number, because they make different...
Oh, the lot number.
They have different adverse effect profiles.
Which is why I think they're playing with lots of different RNA sequences, which is why I think it's not one. Which is why I think that they are, because there's no reason, there were lots of different ways they could have gone about this if they were looking for an emergency response. Obviously the whole thing was engineered because there were certain medicines out there that could have been effective, and the only way they can get emergency use approval is by showing that there's no other effective medicines on the market. And so there are other techniques out there. If they really believed in antibody therapy, it's really difficult to develop a monoclonal antibody, which is what a lot of cancer drugs and things like that are based on. And so, that's why they said they didn't go that route. The monoclonals came out later. Some people were saying they're effective, whatever. But there was a company, there's several companies out there that develop something called polyclonal antibodies. And polyclonal antibodies are supposed to be more effective in the sense that that's our natural antibody within us. It's a polyclonal because what it means is it can respond to lots of different things. And so it would respond to something that would mutate. It would, and again, like everything that I'm talking about, we could question so many different layers of this, but I'm just talking about, strict, if you're just looking at the strict science for what it is. They could have gone after using a polyclonal antibody. Why did they go after RNA? RNA is the only thing where they can really affect the way we are expressing ourselves. And so, there had to be a clear reason for that. And that's why I think that there's multiple sequences that are being tested and used. And constant guinea pigs. Yeah, except they're not tracking it. So the way they ran those trials, again, they did it so that they would have a short-term response. Like they looked at it, I think it was after like a 6-week and then 9-week and then 3 months. And that's the shortest term data. You're not going to see really an effect or a response in terms of how it affects the human health until about 3 months. And so what they did was they did a 3-month and then they unblinded it after that, which means that people knew if they got the vaccine or a placebo. And when they unblinded it, they allowed people to cross over. And what that means is that those that were not vaccinated who got the placebo could get the vaccine. And they did that on purpose to confound the results because now you have no control group. So we're the control group. Right? We're the control group, but there is no control group within that. So there's no way for them to say that there's no data. There's no data from this. There's no data from this. They're just saying that it works. and they're going to spin every story. I mean, you want to have, you want to know how history is rewritten. We've watched it be rewritten how many times in the last 2 years, right? So this is where we begin to realize that, everything that we have been taught is a false narrative to some degree. And this is where you have to be open to being wrong and questioning everything. And so I think that's just the model to adopt, because they're just going to say it works because they have no other thing that they can say except that. All right. Thank you, everybody.